Hello, everyone. My name is Ross Wallace. I'm a principal at Santis Health and an advisor to the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. In that role, it's my pleasure to moderate today's virtual roundtable entitled How a Robust Canadian Life Sciences Strategy Drives Health and Wealth. The life sciences sector in Canada is at a tipping point. The COVID-19 pandemic has starkly demonstrated not only the value of the sector, but also the need to support and strengthen its assets and its institutions. With policymakers laying the cornerstones to grow the sector across the country, the time is ripe to explore what needs to be done next and how a wide range of engaged and committed partners can best collaborate to capitalize on a unique window of opportunity. As an organization focused on improving patient outcomes by optimizing the use of healthcare data and enhancing access to innovative technologies, the Resilient Healthcare Coalition sees a robust life sciences sector as fundamental to Canadian wellness and prosperity. I'd now like to invite RHC co-chair Eva Villalba to introduce the Honorable Perrin Beatty, who will open this roundtable. Beyond her work with the Coalition, Eva is the Executive Director of the Coalition Priorité Cancer au Québec. Eva.
Thank you, Russ. The Honorable Perrin Beatty is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the 200,000 member Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Canada's largest and most representative national business association. Before joining the Canadian Chamber in August 2007, Perrin held the same role at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Perrin was first elected to the House of Commons as a Progressive Conservative in 1972. During his 21 years in Parliament, he served as Minister in 7 different portfolios, including Treasury Board, National Revenue, Solicitor General, Defense, National Health and Welfare, Communications, and External Affairs. Welcome, Mr. Beatty.
Eva, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm really delighted, ladies and gentlemen, to be with you today to discuss a critical part of Canada's industrial makeup, the life sciences sector. Now, the discussion that we're going to have today is very timely. The pandemic has exposed the fragility of our healthcare systems and has demonstrated the central role that the life sciences sector plays in our health and economic well-being. It's also revealed the importance of building resilience in key sectors driven by better adoption of health innovations. To ensure that our economy can be pandemic-proof in future, and indeed health crisis-proof, we can no longer delay Canada's development and actual implementation of a life sciences strategy that supports building a globally competitive biomanufacturing industry. Businesses and groups like the Canadian Chamber stand ready to work with government to build such a strategy, but we need a willing partner at the table. We believe that by working together, Canada should be able to adopt a policy framework that reduces regulatory burdens, extends favorable tax treatment to drug and medical technology manufacturers, invests in the expansion of advanced manufacturing capabilities, and provides federal funding to build a STEM-educated workforce. Now, we're hearing far too often in Canada of startups that don't have the funds or the infrastructure required to scale. The capital that is needed, the capital that's used to help new biomanufacturing firms emerge is too often going to waste because those firms don't have enough support to reach the next level. To mitigate this problem, Canada's innovative life sciences sector requires a sustainable investment environment that's competitive with peer jurisdictions internationally. Now, efforts to enhance pandemic preparedness and biosecurity will require an ecosystem approach. This ecosystem consists of government, Canada's leading research universities, domestic SMEs, foreign-owned multinational enterprises, and numerous other health and life sciences organizations. As a country that depends on trade and investment, we can't ignore the critical role of multinational companies in helping situate Canada as a global leader poised for investments in biomanufacturing. Now, it's important for our country to also send the right messages in global forums. The Canadian Chamber continues to call on our government to not endorse the TRIPS waiver as a tool to increase vaccine production, and to instead support the Ottawa Group Trade and Health Initiative to combat export restrictions and ease red tape at the border. Manufacturing life sciences products is a highly sensitive, complex and controlled process, requiring a significant amount of investment. At the global level, competition for these investments is substantial and it's growing. Canada, however, is well positioned to be an international biomanufacturing hub, given our proximity to the US, to Mexico, to Latin America, and the Caribbean, in addition to our CETA and TPP trade agreements. We have a lot going for us, but the federal government needs to act now if it seeks to double the size of the health and biosciences sector and become a top 3 global hub. To do so, we're going to need to create globally competitive cost structures, including favorable tax treatment and access to public financial supports for both project expenditures and ongoing operations. Additionally, we require investment in accelerating discovery research and related infrastructure, along with support for the commercialization of biopharmaceutical technologies and industry academic research partnerships with biopharma companies. Policies that give incentive to, rather than mandating, increased local production can strengthen domestic manufacturing supply chains, support drug innovation, and generate well-paying jobs. Canadians have heard for a long time about the brain drain of our workers leaving the industry in Canada to pursue opportunities elsewhere. They understand that we need to invest in education to help to address the shortage of science, technology, engineering, and math skills, and do more to provide high-quality professional development for teachers working in STEM fields. We need competitive support for life sciences talent attraction, for development, and for retention. In the future, skills are going to be more important than ever before, and we need to make this a priority. We saw during this pandemic how a regulatory system can work to swiftly deliver safe and effective vaccines to Canadians. This approach needs to be adopted more broadly to produce an agile and streamlined regulatory process for health innovations like biologic therapeutics, vaccines, and related medical technologies. To achieve this goal, we need a horizontal review of federal departmental policy approaches, regulatory plans, and commitments. Now, coming out of the pandemic, Canada has the opportunity to improve the business environment for life sciences companies to build stronger and more resilient health systems, supported by vibrant biotechnology and medical technology sectors that deliver health innovations. What we'll need is alignment and coordination between the federal government and the provinces to benefit from the supply chains that safeguard the public during global health crises. We're at a critical juncture right now. Building resiliency in healthcare is of utmost importance to ensure that we learn from the pandemic and that we don't repeat the same errors that we've made in the future. And that's why this panel is so timely. I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I do. Over to you, Ross.
Perrin, thanks so much. You touched on many important and compelling aspects of this conversation. I know we'll be weaving a number of your remarks into the discussion to come, and I hope you jump back in as you see fit. I'd like to ask our panelists to come on screen, if you will, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But before I do, let me just lay out the approach and structure of the rest of our time together. We have a fantastically robust group of attendees, and I know many of you will have multiple questions for the panel, and I can't commit necessarily to having all of them answered between now and 1:30. However, I am very much interested in getting all those questions put into the chat box as early and as often as possible. And the commitment of the RHC is that we will issue a discussion summary that includes questions asked and also some of the additional questions that were posed with some reflections on all of that over the next few days. So please feel free to err on the side of sharing what you'd like to hear more about. And ideally, we'll pose many of them to the panelists and you'll get our thoughts and perspectives on many of the other ones later after today's session. So with all of that, let me start by moving from east to west across the country with the fantastic group of discussants and panelists we have gathered here today. Let me start with Rory Francis, who is the CEO of the PEI Bio Alliance. Annie Perreault is Director General of Bio Quebec. Dr. Jason Field is President and CEO of Life Sciences Ontario and our other Resilient Healthcare Coalition co-chair, along with Eva. Wendy Hurlbert is President and CEO of Life Sciences BC. And Nicole Decourt, who covers essentially the entire country, is Vice President of Marketing for MedTech Canada with a particular focus on Ontario. So thanks to all of you for making time for this conversation, for making time for this discussion. It is timely, as Perrin alluded to, and I think it's going to be a dynamic and engaging conversation, especially if our prep session is anything indicative of the conversation we're about to have. So I'm going to start by asking you guys a deliberately broad kind of level setting question that you can kind of take anywhere you want. You know, I think we're now in a place where we can safely say, without jinxing it, that the worst days of the pandemic are behind us. And, you know, I'd like all of you, if you can, to reflect on the trajectory of your respective life sciences communities and to think about what you've seen over the last 18 months and perhaps what you're most excited about or most hoping for in the months to come. So a bit of a rear view mirror perspective, but also a looking forward into the future perspective. So why don't I go in reverse order and start with you, Nicole, and then we'll work our way to Wendy and back to Rory.
Sure, and thanks so much, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's a great question. I would say from the medical technology industry perspective, what we saw in the pandemic was the exacerbation of what we already knew were a bunch of problems when it came to the life sciences sector. So we already knew that we had challenges with our supply chain. That it wasn't strategic, it wasn't streamlined, it was uncoordinated. We knew that we had challenges with the way we adopt technology, with the way we bring technologies into the system. All of those things were not a surprise. So when we saw at the start of the pandemic, all that chaos in trying to get all the critical medical equipment that we needed, chaos in terms of getting our lab capacity to where it needed to be, very slow adoption of some of the technologies we were seeing adopted in other countries, like rapid testing. Again, none of that was a surprise. It just, you know, there's a big difference when there's a disease affecting the entire world and millions of people in Canada, and it's so highly amplified versus, you know, the impact of all of those things on something like a cancer patient or, you know, a cardiac patient, and we don't see it amplified the way we saw it during the pandemic. So no surprises, but I think when I think about the future, what is very hopeful is a couple of things. Number one, and I will say for those, a lot of people who know me know this, but I have a background where I used to work in government for many years, and the public understands a lot of these challenges now. This is something they're thinking about. This is something that's resonating with regular people. They're talking about it at the kitchen table, at dinner, those types of things. And that hadn't been happening before the pandemic. So now we have high public awareness and a high public will to, you know, not have those things happen again and to build a really robust life sciences sector in Canada. And that's going to make an intense difference on the decisions of politicians in our government on where we're going to move forward, because you can put to the public now strategies to mitigate, you know, to have a better sector, to better adopt technologies, those types of things, and you will have public support behind that. It's going to be relevant to everybody. So I think the second thing that we saw, and there's some great, you know, best practices that we'd love to see move forward, but we really saw, you know, after the, you know, when all the chaos was happening in the beginning, very quickly we were pulling together groups of companies and decision makers and ministry officials to have these direct conversations about what we needed to do to all work together. So, you know, for example, we have a group that sits with Public Health Agency of Canada now on a regular basis and Health Canada about testing. And we've worked together throughout the whole pandemic, not only to make sure that we had lab capacity available, make sure we had the supplies we needed, but also to try to bring in rapid tests. Now we're hopefully working on at-home testing, and to have those direct conversations and having that open channel and having all the stakeholders work together on a regular basis and really know each other and work together to you know, support what the support we need made a huge difference during the pandemic. So those are kind of two of the areas that I think about.
Nicole, thanks for that. Let's turn to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Ross. And Nicole, I think you did a great summary of the broad implications. As I think about this, I think obviously the pandemic has been very challenging for lots of people, both individually and companies and regions. So what I'm about to say does not at all diminish that. But I think about a lot of the positives that came out of the pandemic, in particular for life sciences. And I think there are a couple of things that stand out. One, I think the recognition of the importance of science-grounded innovation really shone the light. And looking a little bit inwardly for Canada, we actually saw Canadian innovation be on the world stage and the world recognizing that we really are world-class. And in a typical Canadian way, sometimes we need the globe to tell us that we're great for us to actually believe it. And so when you look at things like the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, the delivery mechanism behind that is a company out of BC called Acuitas. They had been working with BioNTech for 5 years on developing cancer vaccines, pivoted very quickly, in swoops Pfizer, and now we have a vaccine. That's how an ecosystem works. So the fact that we saw that happen at rapid speed is fantastic. And so around the world right now, people are benefiting from Canadian-born innovation. And that's amazing. I think the other thing about that is Acuitas has been around for 20 years and nobody heard about them before. And so it also reinforces the importance of the continued investment in science and research and that collaboration that happens between academia, industry, and global industry. So, to me, it's the perfect ecosystem story. I think the other thing that happened is never before have people paid more attention to clinical trials. So the fact that the general public, to your point about talking about things at the dinner table, are actually following along clinical trials and trying to understand them is a fantastic thing. I think, though, the challenge of that is that now we all seem to believe we're, immunologists, and there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of lack of understanding. So we've got this double-edged sword of everyone's interested, but we as a country right now are not being really consistent in our ability and our messaging in educating the public. And it's something that hopefully we're going to reflect on. I think that's where a lot of the stress for a lot of people exists right now around vaccines, because there's inconsistent information coming out federally and provincially, and that causes some challenges. As I look ahead, though, I'm super excited. Canada, the Canadian life sciences sector has never been stronger. There is a recognition about the importance that it plays not only for our health system, but also for our economics of our country and the economic recovery and competitiveness of our country moving forward. And I would say that, the life sciences sector is almost a double helix award, because not only are we contributing positive economically, but we're also addressing some of the complex issues that exist within our healthcare system. And I would argue that for us to return to social stability in some of the areas that we want to go for our country, the life sciences sector has never been more important. I also think, in addition to some of the things that Nicole talked about, we've also seen the incredible importance of data. And we have been really, really stalled and challenged in trying to cross the line into having integrated health data. And as was announced today by our federal government, you need to demonstrate, if you're a Canadian abroad, that you've been double vaccinated and put that forward to enter the country and no longer stay in hotels and those types of things. Hopefully, this pandemic is going to have allowed us to embrace the concept of having integrated health data so that we can make better health decisions and actually service our public through our health system better. So I'm super excited. Yes, it's been challenging, but there's a lot of things that have happened that have created some great momentum for our sector.
Wendy, thanks for that. I mean, you wove in a number of things that Nicole and Perrin both said, and I think the data piece is one we'll definitely want to come back to. I also think all of you have sort of begun to illuminate a little bit what we mean when we say the ecosystem. It is that combination of startups and SMEs and global multinationals and the research community and sort of smart early adopting receptors, and all of those things need to be working together in concert if we're going to have the sort of flourishing that we want and need to have so much. Jason, let me turn to you and see where you want to go from a reflecting back and a sort of projecting forward standpoint.
Sure, Ross. Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to reflect way back and start pre-pandemic. Everyone on this panel has been advocates, passionate advocates and champions for the life sciences industry in Canada for many, many years prior to the pandemic. And one of the big challenges that we've always faced is the value proposition, right? Where we talk about investing in life sciences, investing in healthcare. And that has been always been a challenge because oftentimes it's seen as a cost, not an investment, right? And I think that argument's somewhat gone away now with the pandemic, right? We see that there is no economic prosperity without, a healthy population. So, that argument has sort of changed, I think, and has positioned the life sciences sector and poised it very well for conversations and investment going forward. And we've seen that in the most recent budget, some of the resources that have been allocated towards the life sciences in the most recent federal budget, for example. I think the other thing that the pandemic has done, and I think this was mentioned before, has exposed gaps and weaknesses within our healthcare ecosystem as well, right? Not just our life sciences, supply chains, et cetera, but in our health system. There are inequities that have been long-standing, and the pandemic has just shone a bright spotlight on those, including the social determinants of health. And so we need to address those collectively. It's not just for government to do, it's for industry, it's for patients, it's for the research community. We have to work together to make sure that we address those going forward. And that's the other takeaway from the pandemic, is that we've shown when we have a common goal, we can achieve great things. Government did not respond to this by themselves, nor could they. It required a collaboration with industry, with the research community, with public health officials, like we've never seen before, unprecedented. So I think going forward, we need to have that same mindset in terms of let's establish that common goal in terms of what we want to achieve in a post-pandemic future and work together on that. And finally, my last thought is that I've been musing that the final symptom of COVID-19 will be memory loss. It's amazing how quickly we forget these things once we come out the other side. So there's a window of opportunity. I'm really optimistic. There's a lot of learnings and goodwill and opportunity to build relationships and build a brighter future for life sciences in Canada. But we need to take advantage of this window of opportunity now. So this is a very timely discussion.
Jason, I definitely want to come back to not just the window of opportunity concept, but also just the importance of collaboration as we've seen it and what we want to see going forward. But I want to let Annie get in here, and obviously Rory as well. So Annie, we'll go to you, then we'll go to Rory, and then I'll seize the mic back for a moment.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you for inviting me in this panel. Now it's difficult for me to speak after Mr. Beatty and after Wendy and Jason and Nicole. They've said pretty much everything, but I guess prior to COVID, prior to the pandemic, life sciences sector was it was very important. We know this because we work in that sector, but for the population in general, I think it was a nice thing to have. It was great that we have a good sector. Now it's fundamental. I think there is people realizing, people that in our own family, when we have discussion now, people talk about science and they talk about medicine and they talk about stuff that we would never, we've never discussed before. Now they're realizing it's totally fundamental. If they want their country to go well, if they want their economy to go well, if they want their work to go well, the health of the population needs to go well. Otherwise, things might fall apart. And so right now we are at a place where we've never been before. Life sciences is understood as being crucial to the future, not only of our economy, but of our country, period, and the health of our population. So basically, if we want health to go well, we want the life sciences sector to go well. And that's like an equal that we've never had. We could have put millions of dollars in the PR campaign, all of us together in the last few years. I don't think we would have ever achieved that. So that's wonderful. But now, what are we going to do with this? So I'm very excited, as all my colleagues, but I'm also concerned sometimes because I'm hearing that, you know, a lot of people are looking forward to get out of this pandemic totally, so we can go back to what we used to do. and so we've been shown that we are able to do things that we never thought we would be able to do. Telemedicine, for instance, I don't know if I have the right expression in English, but, you know, having meetings with your doctor through internet, and that's being done right now. If we would not have had pandemic, I think we'd still be discussing the possibility of doing a pilot project to have that, you know. Now it's being done. So we have to make sure, and we have to make the engagement, not just to us, the sector, but the governments and everybody, that we're not going to stop this expertise that, you know, that we are able to do things, to change things, to innovate, not just with the medicine and the vaccine, but with the process. So that's one thing, I think that's one lesson. We can't stop funding research. I think that's one thing we found out. I mean, if we look at things, maybe we didn't funded viral research, research on viruses as we used to. And there was, you know, research needs to be stable. There's need to be a commitment. I think we've learned that. So support the sector can't stop. I think and the sector, and I think somebody mentioned that, is much more than just the pharma industry. That's one other thing that everybody learned in this environment, particularly the politician, I think, is that we're no longer a silo. We're not a silo industry. We are horizontal. We work with, from academic to commercialization, we need to work together. And that includes patients group, by the way, and that should include the government. The government needs to understand better that they need everybody around the table to make this life sciences sector be strong in this country. So that's another lesson that we've learned. So I'm very excited about the future. I see in my backyard here in Quebec a lot of activities going on, a lot of companies being enthusiastic, dynamic, funding, VCs closing funding round, companies being funded. I see a lot of things. I see a lot of enthusiasm. I just think we need to make sure we capitalize on it and we don't stop. The day that the pandemic is over, I don't know if we're going to have such a day, but anyway, the day that we all feel that way is going to be the day that we need in the industry to make sure that people do not forget, and that that we need to make sure that we keep everybody on their toes. Because I have a little concern that people will go back to what needs to be done, that we didn't take care of this industry, that industry during the pandemic, and we took care of a lot of you. So we're gonna go back there for a minute, you wait. We can't do that. We need to make sure we're gonna have a stable sector for the next few years. I hope my message is okay in English, but anyway.
No, Annie, that's fantastic. And I think the notion that we have momentum, there is this window of opportunity.
That's right.
But if we're not careful, it could be squandered, or that momentum could dissipate.
Yes.
It's not organically or naturally or inevitably going to flow on its own. We need to make sure that
we need to make sure we don't need a pandemic every time, or a crisis every time. You know, I had some conversation recently with some members of the government in my province where I felt I needed to say that. Are we going to need another pandemic to make this thing go forward? You know, I'm just concerned a little bit about that. And I think we need to be careful, all of us in the sector, that we're going to keep on working the way we did in the last 18 months.
Yeah, no, that was very well said. Thank you. Rory, why don't you put the period at the end of this sort of first question sentence, and then we'll pivot back to a question about collaboration. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ross. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and pleasure to be here. A lot of the important things have been said, of course, but maybe just a reflection for a moment on even the topic today, which is sort of the health and wealth as it relates to the life science sector in Canada and kind of the implications of all that. And I think we've obviously seen the implications of and the importance of the sector as it relates to the health of Canadians. That's kind of obvious. Globally, the response to the pandemic has educated the world in a way that nothing else could possibly in terms of how this whole life science sector works and often quietly behind the scenes to make sure that our populations in various countries in the world have access to the medications and the products, the vaccines, et cetera, that we need around the globe. I think what we've struggled a bit with in Canada is reinforcing with Canadians and from a public policy perspective, the wealth side of things, the economic impact of the sector, and what it takes and what it will take in the future to make sure that we can continue to grow our economy around a highly innovative sector like life sciences, and just what that whole process looks like. And these days we call it, an ecosystem approach. Here in Prince Edward Island, we've been running that kind of approach for about 15, 16 years now. Our BioAlliance is in fact that kind of a partnership of businesses, academic and research organizations, and government partners. And in our own way, I think we're a microcosm of what we need to think about nationally in terms of those kinds of collaborations around strategy that is absolutely necessary. I'm a fan of industry-led strategy supported by really strong public policy, both provincially and federally. And we need all those partners at the table. I think we saw through the pandemic an extremely resilient sector, another kind of emphasis on why life sciences in Canada, the sector, and not because of the pandemic, in spite of the pandemic, was able to grow, create more jobs, attract investment, continue to expand its capital base and so on, in spite of a pandemic, because it's a long game. The sector plays the long game every day, and from research right through to clinical work to investment to manufacturing. This is a sector that has to be thinking 3, 5, 10 years out in order to make sure that we have a strategy that can be successful. So I think Canadians saw that, and a lot of our politicians were a bit relieved to see that. What do you mean not every sector is in the tank right now economically? There's actually sectors that are thriving during the pandemic. This is a very good thing. That said, we do need that public policy support. Growth requires investment, and we've been bumping up against, I think, limits of growth in terms of infrastructure and skills and training. And I think there have been some good work done and some good support from the public policy side of things to address some of these issues. But I think we'll talk a little later about strategy into the future and how we can build on this kind of collaborative model to make sure we've got the strategy right. We can build on things that have previously been done. The Health and Bioscience Economic Strategy Table was a good start. I think had the pandemic preceded the HBEST Strategic Economic Table Initiative, there would have been probably a bigger and more robust policy response to that work. But that's not to say it's too late, and we need to revisit some of that approach and industry leadership to the approach of establishing life science strategy for the future. So I'll leave it there, Ross.
So Rory, thanks for that. And I really like the way you sort of coined the term of industry-led kind of strategic leadership with support on the public policy front and from policymakers. I think that's kind of a really sort of powerful framing. And all of you actually spoke, I think, about the importance of the plethora of voices who need to be a part of this conversation and new ways to anchor, support, and strengthen partnership and collaboration. And I think, we've all seen some recent foundational investments directed towards enhancing the biomanufacturing capacity of this country. And in those announcements, you see the federal government and provincial governments sort of coming together to direct kind of integrated and coordinated support to some real sort of anchor institutions. And I think that's a nice demonstration of what can happen when those stars are aligned and those voices are united. I mean, I guess maybe I'll ask you guys sort of one more question, and then we'll see where the conversation goes after that, around this question of partnership and collaboration. So maybe a two-parter. What kind of partnership and collaboration are you all looking for between sort of provincial and federal governments? Because there is really, I think, a multi-jurisdictional piece of all of this. And what do you see as the essential role that your organizations can play in fostering and furthering collaboration even more broadly? Because it seems like it's embedded in the DNA of all of your organizations that's a big part of what you do. So Perrin, maybe I'll come to you and then to Annie, and then we'll take it from there. So collaboration between governments and collaborations with governments. Perrin?
Ross, it's essential that we have this collaboration. This is an issue which is not owned by any one level of government or by any one sector. It is a national issue. It requires then a national strategy. And that means federal and provincial governments working together and working together closely with the private sector as well. You look at the issue of skills and training. Provincial governments have to lead on something like that. You look at the issue of R&D, where federal funding is so important to be able to support the sector, or where federal taxation requirements are going to be critical in terms of developing the environment in which the sector can operate. And as a consequence, then it will be critical to have a coherent strategy and one that is well understood and that cuts across jurisdictional boundaries, including between the public and the private sector. And what we've seen during the COVID crisis is that it is possible to do this, that you can take a Team Canada approach if there's a clear vision there. So we can achieve that. What role can the Canadian Chamber play? Chambers across the country can make it clear that we need to have a focus on building a vibrant life sciences sector in this country, and that we need all the players to come together to do that. So that's the contribution I would see us making.
Great. Thanks, Perrin. Annie, to you. You represent a province that has long thought about the importance at a provincial level of the life sciences sector from a strategy standpoint. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on these collaboration questions.
Thank you. Yes, we do. We do have a Quebec life sciences strategy, and we're actually in the process of reviewing it. And one good thing about that strategy, I mean, we always want to improve it, but and there's places for improvement, but at least there is a commitment by the government from both minister, health and economy, that are responsible for that strategy. So I think Canada certainly needs a Canadian life sciences strategy. I agree totally with what Mr. Beattie said, and that's one thing I've been talking about quite a bit and supporting my colleagues. We've all mentioned that. We've all signed an open letter. Pretty much everybody here on the panel signed that letter. So that's really important. But to establish a Canadian life sciences strategy that will be successful, we first need to sit all together and establish the diagnosis, make a diagnosis of what's going on right now, what we're doing well, not well, where we need to improve. We need to do that. And we cannot just act on one pieces at a time. That's not gonna work. And to make that diagnosis accurate, we need the actors around the table. And the actors, if you want to do a Canadian life sciences strategy that's going to be successful, are obviously the federal government, the provincial government, and the different organizations that are making this life sciences sector. So research institution, clearly, but small enterprises, biotech, and CROs, clinical research organization. We need patients group. We need the pharmas to be there as well. So that's the first step. And I hope we're going to make that first step fairly soon. I haven't seen that coming, but hopefully it's going to come. There's so many things needs to be tackled after that are of both jurisdiction, like Mr. Beatty said. So that's why we need a national one. And a good example of this is, and we don't want to talk about this today at length, I know that, the PNPRB issue, but the reality is that there are no support or very little support from provincial government on the changes that the federal government wants to make, because they understand the impact it's going to have. Quebec is one of those. I'm going to talk about the province of Quebec, which intervened legally at the court appeal level to say those changes cannot be happening. So you can't put in place changes to regulations that don't have the support of provincial governments that are trying very hard to make their life sciences sector growing in their province. It's very important that adopting government strategies that are coherent and that are supported by the provinces, that's one part of having a life sciences sector alive and thriving in this country. We need to make sure that the regulations environment are stable and are favorable to attract investment. We need to make sure that we have a supply chain that is secure and efficient. We need to stimulate research and innovation. We need to recruit people. Immigration is really going to be an important issue in the life sciences sector. Right now in my province, it's a big thing for my members to make sure that we can recruit people that we do not have here right now. And obviously improve funding. Funding is at the heart of creating small biotech and making them grow and go through phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3. It needs funding. So all of those are issues that needs to be tackled. But before we do that, we need to make the diagnosis. And if we want to do that correctly, we need the partners and the actors around the table. And I hope that the federal government understand that. I really do.
Mm. Thanks for that, Annie. And Jason, I know you want to jump in on this. Let me just, before passing you the mic, just flag for folks. I should have known when we booked this panel that we could easily have filled 90 minutes. We probably could have filled 3 hours, but we are going to give folks back their afternoons or their mornings in about 15 minutes or so. So if there's a burning question that somebody in the audience would like to share in the chat function, this would be a great time to do it. Otherwise, I will just keep chugging along with this great group and the questions I have in front of me. So Jason, to you, and then after that, we'll see where we go next.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I entirely agree with Annie. And, you know, Perrin made a comment, that description of Team Canada. And I think when we think about a national strategy, I think what we need to do is position that as a pan-Canadian strategy. So that means that the federal government does have a role to play in very specific areas like intellectual property, which Annie had mentioned and drawn out, but still be working with the provinces to make sure that the provinces are being supported by these federal policies, because they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones that control the provincial healthcare systems. They're the ones that are interfacing with their own economic development agencies, et cetera. So there really needs to be a strong collaboration and knowing the roles of the federal government, and they have a lot of tools in their toolbox that they can use in terms of providing resources with strings attached that allow flexibility for provinces to chart their own path and not be so prescriptive. So I think ideally that's the way I would like to see a pan-Canadian approach to a life sciences strategy take place. But the other key element is that it needs to be an all-government approach. And this goes both for the federal level as well as the provincial level. When we talk about life sciences, as we were discussing, right, it's research policy and academic and education policy, training policy. It is commercialization and economic development policy, as well as health policy. And these departments have to be aligned. That's a huge challenge for government, because I used to be within government and there are existing silos. Everybody's talked about this for a long time, but those have to be broken down. Governance structures have to be established to align those policies around common goals. And that has to be done at all levels of government.
Thanks for that, Jason. Wendy or Rory or Nicole on this one, or should I ask you another question?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because I think this is a really interesting topic. It's very hard to be a healthcare company in Canada because you're not dealing with one healthcare system. You're dealing with 10, 13 different healthcare systems and a real lack of coordination across the system. And it is a serious challenge. For anyone who's a bit of a political junkie, I listen to this podcast called The Hurly Burly that I highly recommend for anyone who finds those things interesting. They had a great conversation last week on the podcast. There's a guy on their political panel named Scott Reed who was talking about what he's excited for post-pandemic is, there's going to be commissions and reports and all that kind of stuff. And where is the question of federalism going to come into play on this, right? We saw during the whole pandemic differentiating responses all across the country, depending on the province. The federal government trying to find its way through what their role is and what their role wasn't. And then even within each province, like in Ontario with their 34 different public health units doing things 34 different ways when it comes to something like vaccine rollout, right? So, they were talking about the country needs to have this real debate and this real question on what the role of federalism is, and especially when it comes to healthcare, pandemic response, the economy, all of those types of things. We saw this a lot during COVID. So, supply chain is a perfect example. We began the pandemic with chaotic systems across the country. Some provinces well organized, like Alberta, that have one single procurement group and supply chain organization. Ontario, the opposite, that didn't have centralized procurement and supply chain and had to build that quickly within the pandemic. We worked with the federal government. The provinces each got organized in and of themselves, but where we struggled was trying to get the provinces to sit down with the federal government all at the same table and with each other to try to figure out who needed what, where was the dire need, where did we need to shift our resources, all of those kind of things. So it's a problem. We saw some best practices or little examples of coordination that were really helpful. So 3M, right? 3M is one of our member companies. The 3M worked with both the province of Ontario and the federal government to bring manufacturing of N95 respirators to Canada. That was a really great thing. But that is not the norm. That was the exception on a very highly publicized event that happened during COVID. I think, so if you think about where does this go, I'll give you one example. The next healthcare crisis we're going to face, or we're already well into, is surgical backlogs. And the life sciences sector can play a very big role to help with that. Very big role. But the country needs to think about how we all work together to do this. Quebec, for example, put out a great call for solutions to the medical technology industry, asking for their proposals on different technologies that can help with surgical backlogs. They got responses. They're doing projects. It's a great best practice. It's not happening anywhere else in the country. The federal budget came out a couple of months ago. There wasn't the amount of dedicated funding for surgical backlogs that I think we would have liked to have seen, where we saw during the pandemic, the federal government can fund things for the provinces and direct that funding to try to bring that level of national, it's not quite coordination, but at least, shared priorities. So I think this question on, whose business is what, and how can the federal government sit down with the provinces and work together, and how can the provinces work better with each other? Huge in the future. I think a big debate needs to happen about that, and we really need to land in a better place than we were.
Thank you, Nicole. The notion of landing in a better place than we were, I mean, one of the things we talk a lot about at the Resilient Healthcare Coalition is, we need to aspire to do more than just roll the clock back to the end of 2019. There are new opportunities, there are new learnings. There is this window that we've all talked about over the course of this conversation. And I think we can do better. We can build back better. And that's really important. Rory, I know you wanted to pick up on this conversation, and then I'm gonna pivot back to you, Wendy, after that.
Just want to give a quick kind of on the ground practical example of of collaboration and again, private sector leadership supported by public sector in a key area, which Perrin referred to already, as did others, and that is in skills and training. So, you know, we're seeing, you know, very important and very large investments in biopharmaceutical manufacturing, biomanufacturing in general across Canada. So we need, obviously, to have a skills and training strategy that supports that. Otherwise, we're going to have lots of stainless steel and lots of infrastructure, but you need the brain power to support that. We've been fortunate enough before the pandemic started to kind of have, because again, necessity is the mother of invention, a lot of pressure on human resources in Atlantic Canada in the life science sector, more demand than supply. We created something we call the Canadian Alliance for Skills and Training in Life Sciences, which, to keep a long story short, now because of pandemic, and we've come together with support from 4 of our national life sciences organizations to create a foundation for what will be absolutely essential in providing the pipeline of talent, both academic, through academic partners, as well as upskilling within the corporate world and the companies that are both existing and the new companies coming into biopharma manufacturing in Canada. And that wouldn't happen without the kind of collaborative model and a platform model that allows for academic and industry organizations to work together internationally as well as nationally to access the right kind of curriculum, the right kind of training and experience to be able to support industry here in Canada. So you'll be hearing more about that, but those are the kind of things that we can do in Canada if we put our mind to it and make sure that we have the right leadership and support for initiatives that are going to create the solutions we need for the whole kind of supply chain in the sector.
Rory, thanks for that. Wendy, I'm going to come to you in a second. Maybe I'll give you guys sort of one last final comment or question to think a little bit about. And by think a bit about, I mean, prepare your sort of 20 to 30 second responses, because we're unfortunately burning through our time in a wonderful way. And that's just the question of how we're going to assess our progress. So if this illustrious group came back together in 2 years, I'd be curious to know from each of you what you will be looking for to see if we are tracking in the right direction. What are the milestones or the indicators or the developments that you ideally will want to point to 12, 18, 24 months out to show that this energy and enthusiasm articulated today has been captured. So Wendy, you can answer that or not, but I want to come back to you.
Well, I wanted to touch on somebody made the comment about rolling back to 2019, and I don't think that's going to happen. The train left the station on many things. One of them being virtual care, as Annie talked about, and I know that was also had its challenges for some healthcare professionals that weren't really set up. I mean, we all know most of our GPs are independent businesses, so they had to pivot quite quickly. And there will always be a place for in-person doctors' visits. So, I think what we're going to see is hopefully that we're going to take the good that happened over the last year and a half and project it and move it forward. And there's going to obviously be some things that we want to go back to 2019. Surgical backlogs, as Nicole talked about, is a very significant issue that needs to get addressed. But one of the other things is the collaboration that happened. Over the last year and a half, I've met many more people in the Ministry of Health than I knew back in 2019. And one of the things that we did very quickly in British Columbia as our little not-for-profit is we basically created a COVID-19 program where we collaborated with industry and government to try and find and source the critically needed supplies that were available. What that did also is it really helped us establish a strong partnership because we were working together. We met with the procurement organizations that gave us their critically needed supplies every week, and then we reached out to our industry. We also had a PPE drive before the labs closed in academia and research institutions, where we collected all of the PPE that was sitting in those soon to be closed labs and redistributed them to the front lines. And we showed how we could do that and collaborate together. And by the way, this was without any money changing hands. One of our industry partners opened up a warehouse for us so we could deliver everything, resort it, and take it to, we went to the downtown east side and we went to most of the health regions. So I think that collaboration has been really strong in those relationships that have been developed. I'd also have us look internally, because we're representing our respective organizations. And starting in March 2020, we've met collectively the provincial leads of each one of these every 2 weeks. And what that's done is that has had us collaborate a lot more. We have much more awareness about what is going on in each other's provinces. And we have a huge role to play from a leadership perspective on helping bring this into a national conversation. I didn't know Annie 15 months ago. And she's like one of my favorite passionate female life sciences leaders now. And so I think we can't keep pointing, oh, federal government, provincial government, you guys need to talk. But let's be honest, we didn't talk 15 months ago. And now we do. And we have a huge role to play in being able to help drive forward this agenda. So again, I'm pretty optimistic. It's not going to be without hard work. But I really hope that 2 years from now, I'm going to say that I'm meeting with my provincial counterparts in MedTech Canada and the business councils and continuing to collaborate and move the needle forward. And that we're not going to go back to being a niche sector. We're going to go back to we're going to continue to grow into that sector that plays an important role, not only in the economy, but also in creating a sustainable healthcare system, because really we're all here for delivering better patient outcomes. At any point in our life, we're a patient, we're a caregiver, and we have a job. And most of us are here to try and really make a difference, and I think we can. And I think we've shown we will. And so how will we measure that? We're going to see that this sector continues to play this important role, and that we're going to continue to drive collaboration across our country.
Wendy, I think those are about as perfect a set of closing remarks as possible. So Annie, I mean, I
totally agree with Wendy. I'm just looking forward to be able to go back to BC and meet with her in person.
So listen, it's Annie, why don't I'll give you 30 seconds and then I'll probably, I should close us off.
If you're talking metrics, you're talking numbers. So I'm going to go back to what I said before. We're going to need to be able around a table and establish those numbers we want to see, but it could be about the numbers of foreign investments that we see in life sciences in Canada over the next 5 years, for instance, because we know we're talking about being Canadian right now, but we know this is a global sector. And so the collaboration is, and Wendy started the day by talking about BioNTech and a BC company in the US. That's what collaboration is all about. That's our sector. It's global. So foreign investment, obviously number of companies that we have in Canada that are going through phase 2, phase 3, and maybe stay on with us and become Canadian flagship for us. We're going to need to start thinking about that and how many we want to see. And what do we want Canada to be? What number do we want to be in the world? So these are the kind of metrics we need to start thinking and talking about.
Amazing. Thank you, Annie. So I sort of semi-jokingly said, if we all came back together in 2 years, what would we talk about, and how do you hope that the world and the ecosystem would have evolved? I would actually like us all to come back together much sooner than 2 years from now. And I think we've only just touched on the importance of so many of these elements of progress, elements of partnership, elements of policy. I cannot thank you enough for your thoughtful, eloquent, and insightful comments. I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and the number of people who participated clearly endorse that perspective. So thank you all very much. We will have, for folks sort of following along at home, we'll pull some of the most powerful quotes and perspectives and just comments from this presentation out for folks and share that with you afterwards. And again, just to let you know, if you're interested in finding out more about the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, you can find us at resilienthealthcare.ca. And I also want to call out that last Thursday, we released our second podcast, which is another element or another perspective on this question of health and wealth, which is about how health charities are building back better. And that included conversations with the Arthritis Society, the Health Charities Coalition, and the Lung Health Foundation. So thanks to everyone who participated today. More from the RHC soon. And again, an honor and a privilege to be a part of this conversation. Thank you all, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Ross.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
And Ross, if you post the, if you have recorded this, and I believe you did, we can certainly forward this to a bunch of people here in the province. And I think a lot of my colleagues can do the same on their own promotion system if you think that could be helpful. So
that would be wonderful. And absolutely, we will make it easy for you to tell the story of this story.
Perfect. Ciao.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.